Welcome to the Swift Healthcare video podcast, exploring the intersection of healthcare and leadership, hosted by Dr. Patrick Swift. SwiftHealthcare.com is your resource for healthcare professionals to find coaching and consulting to engage, restore, and transform yourself and your organization. And now, here's your host, Dr. Patrick Swift.
Welcome, folks, to another episode of the Swift Healthcare video podcast. I am so excited about our guest for the show today. We have Quint Studer. Quint, welcome to the show.
I'm pumped about you being here. In fact, I own a minor league baseball team, and it's all about high energy, high fun. And if you're thinking about getting a side job on healthcare, we could use you at the ballpark now. Thank you.
I would jump at that chance. Careful what you ask for, Quint. My wife's
ready.
in Miami right now, visiting some family. I think I'd be happy to get down in Pensacola. Folks, if you can feel the love, I hope you can, because the man we have on the show here, I have the greatest respect for, and you are in for a treat. And Quint, I know you're a humble man, and I just want to acknowledge how you have impacted this profession. So folks, if you are listening, pay attention, because I have a master class for you in this conversation. And most importantly, with my values, it's about joy, hope, compassion, courage. And who better to have on the show than Quint Studer? So here's Quint's bio. If you don't know who Quint Studer is, listen to this. Quint Studer is a well-known healthcare operator, author, coach, and mentor to many. He has dedicated the last 3 decades to creating tools and techniques that make healthcare a better place for physicians to practice medicine, patients to receive care, and employees to work. He's written numerous books. I've got a couple here on my desk I want to show you, articles, and his work is always based on evidence, research, and tools and techniques. So Quint Studer, welcome to the Swift Healthcare video podcast.
No, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely, Quint. So let's kick it off with some fun here. And I want to ask you, in your own words, what got you into healthcare? Why do you do what you do, Quint?
Well, it's going to be way different than most people think. Alcoholism got me into healthcare.
Oh, wow.
When I was 31 years old, December 24th of 1982, I crashed. I surrendered personally. All of a sudden, I had that moment of clarity they talk about. And I said, my life's not trending in the right direction. And so I sought help, and I'm a recovering alcoholic. I'm in my 39th year of sobriety. So
Yes.
How I got into healthcare was I was going to 12-step meetings at a hospital that treated people for alcoholism. And I was going to meetings, and I saw an ad that they were looking for someone to work at the treatment center in working with school districts and employers. And because I was a teacher of children with special needs, and once I got in recovery, I started something called a student assistance program. It mirrored an employee assistance program, but for students that they could reach out, particularly if they had a family member or so on.
Awesome. Of course you did, Quint. That's great. That's fantastic.
So I talked to them, and they hired me as a community relations rep, and I did that for 3 years. And when an employee who worked in a hospital, before they went back to work, we did something called a back to work, and I went with them to talk to the human resource person about how do they re-enter the workplace.
Yep.
And one day, a human resource person at a hospital in Wisconsin said, we have an opening here in marketing, community relations. You really do a good job. Why don't you come here? So that's how I got into healthcare. So when I speak to colleges, they want to know my career track. I say, well, it might not be the one you want to follow, but it is the one it is.
I love that, Quint, because I love the expression turning your kryptonite into your superpower. And what you've done in the arc of this story even is acknowledging the sorrow and the rock bottom and the insight and the compassion that arose from that. And by that, suffering and sorrow has led to a global impact on raising the bar in healthcare.
Yeah, in recovery, when you help somebody in recovery, they call it 12-stepping. You're bringing 12 steps to them. And I tell people I've been 12-stepping healthcare now for a long time.
I love it. So folks, step on up. Let's step here. I'm inspired by that turn of phrase. We're 12-stepping healthcare here. There's so much for us to talk about. In thinking about this conversation, one of the first questions I want to ask you is, listen, folks, Quint has published many books. I've got The Busy Leader's Handbook, How to Lead People in Places That Thrive, Building a Vibrant Community. But the first one I read of Quint's, this is my favorite. You can see it's dog-eared and got all kinds of notes on it, ears, Hardwiring Excellence. And I happen to love this book. And I wanted to ask the author, what about that book is your favorite part, your favorite message that stands out of that book?
Well, I think that my favorite part is when you read the stories about people recapturing their purpose in healthcare. For example, on page 251, I got a letter from a person who, and I'll just read it real quick, and I won't read the whole thing. It says, "I know I make a difference. One of my employees who had been here just about a year became Employee of the Month. When it was announced, she received the recognition. It brought tears to her eyes. She was pleased during the whole month. Usually she was very quiet and somewhat withdrawn, but during this month, she was one of the girls. We talked about things with her coworkers that she had never talked about before. The moment I realized just how much it meant to her was when she was diagnosed with cancer. It was during the month she was Employee of the Month. While talking to her husband about a return to work, he mentioned to me that she never felt so included and proud in her whole life. The job here at the hospital was a dream job for her, and she had really not felt worthy of working here. She was so proud of her Employee of the Month plaque that she hung in her living room for all to see. During her illness, she felt she had an extended family. She said she felt loved by her coworkers. We visited her on a regular basis and called her several times a week to see if she needed anything. About 5 months later, Susan, our coworker, died. We were very sad at her passing. I personally attended her funeral with 4 other women from our office. As we approached the coffin, we saw something at the exact same moment that we could not believe. On the back of her coffin, next to her shoulder, was an Employee of the Month plaque and a card signed by all of us in the office. At that moment in my life, I thought of you, for I had made a difference. That's what I love. You know, healthcare, we come in with a full emotional bank account, but because what happens, there's these withdrawals. So what I love the most is when I see people sort of recapturing it. And once you recapture it, you realized how much you missed it, and then you keep it.
Yeah, I love that. And in the face of the burnout and the suffering and the sorrow that our colleagues in healthcare, whether you're new to the profession, whether you're a CEO, whether you're near retirement, doesn't matter. There's been so much sorrow and suffering and burnout, and what you're touching on is connecting to that purpose and connecting to that meaning. And that's embedded in the book. And I'd add the title Hardwiring Excellence. If you've been in healthcare a while, you've heard that term used about we're hardwiring things, and even with some cynicism, we're hardwiring things as if it can be programmed. And you're speaking to, it's not about the hardwiring these tactics just for the tactics' sake. You hit the nail on the head in the whole cycle of life in that story, I think. Because it touches on, in healthcare, we're saving lives, we're improving lives, but we're also helping people through their whole life transition and finding meaning in what they do. So I think that's a beautiful, beautiful story. I appreciate your touching on that one.
Well, thank you. I think also, not only think of the impact the coworkers had, and I think what happens here is in healthcare, like you're absolutely right. You know, there's a lot of withdrawals that happen in healthcare just naturally. It just happens naturally. And so I think we've got to get maybe to the extreme of making sure we're doing deposits for people, because there's natural withdrawals. And I'm sort of looking at deposits. And the thing I've been talking a lot this last 8-9 months, Patrick, is tools and techniques to actually help people see that seeking help, you know, I think we've overplayed resiliency. I think we say, oh, we got to be resilient. We have people teaching resiliency, coaching resiliency, but you need to add in there that part of resiliency is getting help so you can be resilient.
Yes.
It's not playing through pain.
Yeah.
It's not sucking it up.
Yeah.
And not saying you don't have to suck it up once in a while.
Sure.
But it really means that. And what I look at in healthcare is one of the top 1, 2, or 3 pharmaceuticals that employees are going to be looking at in any healthcare system you go to as an antidepressant. I'm not against antidepressant whatsoever. I'm on the board of Hazelden and Betty Ford, but I do believe that it's good to match it with other things and other type of services. Yet one of the least utilized services in all healthcare is the employee assistance program. So we've got an industry that has some of the best mental health benefits in the country, yet, and some of the best EAPs in the country, yet we have a stigma. I've been speaking a lot to
It's hard to ask for help.
medical school and residents, and I not can give the name of the school, but I give them credit for surveying all their medical students and residents, and 50% of them said they were eating different, not sleeping well. Yeah. About 8 to 10 said they were using substances that probably aren't the best for long-term health or short-term health of them. So they've said we're really sort of off grid here a little bit, or getting off grid. Then the question is, would you seek help? And it went almost down to zero because they were terrified of the stigma, terrified what would happen. So, I think part of this
got a lot of work to do
is healing our inside. And when we heal our inside, leadership's an inside job. And when we get our inside right, the outside gets better.
We've got a lot of work to do. I love that quote. We've got a lot of work to do. I'm as a psychologist, I'm treating patients in New York.
I almost
New Jersey.
Want to lay down here. I almost want to lay down.
Get comfortable. My job is to help you.
My wife said, I've never met a mental health therapist. I didn't want to lay on the couch for a few hours.
Yeah. But what you have to share, Quint, is so from the heart. And I so value that. And I really hope folks if you are listening, please open that heart, open those ears. What we're talking about are profound concepts that can transform healthcare. And as a psychologist, supporting burnt out healthcare professionals, and as an executive coach supporting healthcare professionals trying to move the needle forward, Quint, what you're touching on is that it's critical to ask for help, and there's a stigma against asking for help, right?
Yeah, and people say to me, well, gee, you're pretty open about this. And I said, well, because it allows me to help people. And so, for example, I was speaking to a university virtual to MBA, MHA students, and I just brought it up. And 2 days later, I got contacted by one of the students, and he said, I know I have an alcohol problem. And he said, but I'm so terrified if anyone finds out, it'll ruin my career.
Right.
What do you think? So I don't think it's hurt mine all that much, and the good news is I happened to be with him virtually about 2 weeks ago, and he celebrated his first 30 days of sobriety. And I know that's not what this conversation is about, but I think in healthcare, we've just got to, when I say make it a better place for employees to work, I think sometimes we think, if we teach them how to handle a difficult situation, which I get. I mean, I do TM the whole bit. Yeah, you know what I really want? I just want places to run better. I think sometimes we think that the symptom is the cause. And the story I tell is a physician was coming to see me one time, and the nurse manager on the unit said, he was very caustic and rude to us this morning, and he's coming down to see you, and you need to tell him he can't do that. I said, well, did anything happen before that? She said, well, he's a surgeon and he was waiting for the patient in surgery. We didn't read the orders right. We fed the patient. He had to cancel the surgery. And I said, I get he shouldn't have said that. And I'm not trying to put a blame, but I talk a lot. I wrote a book called Healing Physician Burnout. And one of the ways we reduce burnout is just running better organizations, investing in our leaders so they have better skill set, making sure people have the tools and equipment to do the job, and making sure they know that it's okay to call the EAP. It's okay to get help. So I'm really pumped about healthcare. I've never been more excited about healthcare, as I think the pandemic has been terrible, but it's also shined the light on certain things that we've needed to do for years that we haven't done deep enough in, which is, again, making sure we provide people the training that they need. Because the other thing with COVID is a lot of training has been stopped or paused. And I get that. It had to be. So I think we get back into the training, the development, but also really looking at the whole, like we want to look at the whole patient. I saw a cartoon years ago on a neurosurgeon, and he went in and he looked at the person's head and he said, he looks all right to me. And then they showed there was no body there. And they're so busy looking at their part of the person. Silo. And I think this pandemic has made it, we can no longer not touch on the emotional health of our workforce.
Amen to that. Amen to that. That's a perfect segue to the next question I want to ask you, which is using the the parallel of a primary care physician for our listeners. You've coined the phrase being a primary care leader. And that is such a powerful concept. And I want to ask you to share with us, what do you mean by that?
Well, I thank you. I think as a primary care physician, I have great respect for primary care specialists.
Absolutely.
Is they can look at the broad picture, but they also know what they can treat and what they shouldn't treat. When somebody calls me and say, my doctor's referred me to a certain specialist, I say, well, then you have a good doctor, because they recognize their limits. That's not bad. That's good. And I believe I'm more of a primary care person. So for example, when I go to an organization, I'm really good at, I can tell them some things they can do. I mean, I have certain tools, certain techniques that I think are really quite good right now. I can tell them how to measure wellness, stress, and burnout. I have a tool for that. But now for certain, I can tell them, like the other day, a healthcare system called me and said, Quint, we're really looking at creating better metrics to measure our leaders on. Now, I could have sent them some metrics, but I said, well, here's who you should call. This person could be really helpful because this is what they do full time. Or, I'm looking at teaching clinicians how to have difficult conversations with family members. Well, I've been around long enough that I have a Rolodex of people that are better at these things than I am. So I tried supply chain management. I know some of the best supply chain management people in the world. So what I try to say as a primary care doctor, I can help your organization and I can help them do some things where are self-need. You don't need to get a consultant. You don't need to go anywhere else. Yep. But I also can provide them with really good services of who are the best people in the country for what they're looking for. So for example, if you look at the Gratitude Symposium, we have Susan Keene Baker, who's just great at helping people look at empathy in a different way.
Yeah, so Stephen Beeson.
Yeah, if you're looking at that, and what you are one of those great people. You look at, that's what I meant by primary care. I think, and I like it because I think sometimes organizations want to provide everything. So, I can, it's sort of like going to a law firm and they keep wanting you to use lawyers at their firm, but maybe they're not the best lawyers at their firm.
Yeah.
Just because they're there. So what I try to do is always find the right resource for a healthcare system that I think fits their needs. And the beauty is I do it in a way where there's no relationship with me. There's no referral for me. I'm just trying to find them the best person to meet their needs.
Yeah, falling in love with your customer and addressing your customer's needs, whether it's you doing that or someone else. And, the point of this podcast is to explore the intersection of healthcare and leadership for listeners that are from the CEO to the new employee in a hospital, from environmental services to any part of the organization, right? And you're describing this primary care leader concept, and you have grown to become essentially a primary care leader for the planet. And that's not hot air. Folks, Quint Studer, if you don't know, has had a profound impact on healthcare around the globe. And so you, Quint, have grown into this primary care leader who can consult on a national level, international level, community level, down to Pensacola level, right? For our listeners, for someone who wants to grow as a primary care leader, what advice would you have for someone who, let's say in middle management or aspiring to management, how to become a better leader in the sense of primary care leader? If you're not going to be a specialist in one certain area, what would Quint Studer say is important for becoming a primary care leader?
If you're a middle manager, you're a primary care specialist because you got to do it all. And, I was on a curriculum committee at the Harvard Business School, and we went through the 15 foundational skills that every leader needs. Now, some of them you need more than others. So, for example, if you're a med-surg nurse manager, you probably don't have a revenue stream you have to worry about. But there are a number of things you have to be. And I think the key is you really need to be good at benchmarking. And I think that's sort of a missing skill in healthcare because we're so busy. You don't get to see other managers doing it because, you know, you're on your unit. The only time you might see the other managers is at the month-to-month manager meeting. Almost.
Right.
You don't see them. And it's a tough profession. I own a minor league baseball team, and they see each other all the time. This batter sees this batter. This pitcher sees this pitcher. It's constant benchmarking against each other. So I think one of the skills that every manager needs is to go out and be okay figuring out who can I learn from, and not feeling like I'm less than because I have to. So, for example, when you look at rounding, the person who really we learned rounding from was Michelle Wasco, and she's passed away. She was a nurse manager at Holy Cross Hospital in 1993. And we were trying to improve our patient experience, and we were pretty bad. We thought, it just came back and we said, we're in this percentile, this percentile. Then Don Dean started digging into the data and said, you know what? One of our nursing units is patients are a lot happier on this nursing unit than the other nursing units. And, you know, it's the same semi-private room, the same intercom system, the same everything. So what's different in that unit? So Don went up. I said, Don, go spend a week with Michelle. I'll pull it. He was a radiology tech. I said, I'll pull you out of radiology for a week and watch her. Because we asked Michelle what she was doing, and she said, oh, nothing different than anyone else, because she didn't know.
Yeah.
So Don went up on the unit and just watched her Monday, watched her Tuesday, and Wednesday. He said, you know, Michelle, I notice when you come to work every morning, the first thing you do is visit every patient. And she said, well, doesn't everybody do that? No, we weren't doing that. So we call her the mother of rounding. You know, we perfected over the years, but see, that's that benchmarking. And we have to be careful because sometimes our stuff gets in the way of benchmarking. You know, we rationalize or we blame or why they're different. I call it terminal uniqueness. So I think to be a primary care physician, you really need to have good self-awareness, which knows what you're good at and what you need improvement on. And you also really need to be coachable. And then you also very much need to be comfortable seeking out people that can help you be better.
Love that. Folks, I really want to encourage you to listen to that point, to be open to looking for help, asking for help. And Quint spoke about rounding. I know a lot of healthcare folks have heard about the concept of rounding, right? And so if you've heard that, I know there can be a cognitive bias to think, okay, I've heard this stuff. But what Quint just shared was the process, recognizing, okay, benchmark, where are the numbers? How am I doing? How are we doing? And then looking for the solutions. And what I just want to underline, Quint, what you just shared is the process of looking at the numbers and then being curious. Well, what is working and what's not working? And the answer in this story you just shared was rounding.
Well, and I think also
there's the mentality.
Having the specific outcome you want in mind. You know, so for example, I'm a big believer in peer interviewing. So when I was president of a hospital, we introduced peer interviewing. Okay. So that means when I'm rounding, I'm going to be asking employees, are you involved in peer interviewing? Has your manager told you about peer interviewing? What do you think of peer interviewing? So all it takes is about 3 days, and every manager knows I'm out there asking about peer interviewing, and everybody knows about peer interviewing.
Could you unpack that for the audience?
Oh, absolutely.
What is peer interviewing?
Yeah, well, doctors, we were dealing with hospital-acquired infection rate, which was way too high. So we started drilling down. And every day I saw a doctor, I would ask them about, are your patients getting any hospital-acquired infections here? Because we're really focusing on that. So if we've gone down to 2%, which is best practice, but I still want to go down to 0, what are you noticing? So I think the challenge with my book, it gave an example, and everybody thinks those are the 4 or 5 questions I have to ask. No, rounding is just a toolkit. You ask the question on the outcome you want to be looking for at that moment. So for example, doctor, our first start case now is up to 92% of our first cases are starting on time. Have you noticed the improvement in the OR? Oh, yeah, I think I have. Or, well, no, I haven't. No. Let's look at it. So yeah, I think,
it's the conversation.
You learn from others. One of my stories, and I'll quit with this, it's just such an example. Go to a big healthcare system and you find a certain department that does something really, really well. then you tell everyone that this place does really, really well, and you encourage them to go visit this manager. Then 90 days later, you ask that manager, how many people have visited you? And it's very small.
Yeah.
But I think that's where leadership comes in.
Leadership, that's it.
To make those comfortable conversations, to make those safe conversations, that you're not thinking less of someone when they seek help.
Yeah.
Either you're thinking more of someone. I was just talking to the owner of the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp and baseball, and he's a AAA guy and I'm a AA guy. We were talking about, exchanging staffs so we can learn from each other. So every industry learns from each other, but healthcare is a little more difficult because our managers are pretty isolated. They don't see each other. They're out in their unit. And that's why I think we've really got to work really hard at providing them resources to improve their own skill set. And that's the values. The other part of my Hardwiring Excellence I make a very strong statement. You can tell the values of the organization on the investment they make in training and development. Because who would want somebody to be in a job without having training and development? True. And healthcare, sometimes we got better, but I think the COVID just naturally has paused some of that. So I think as the pandemic changes a bit, healthcare is going to have to play some real catch up on training and development.
Couldn't agree with you more. And the notion of hardwiring excellence, what you're sharing and pointing out is the thought process, the mentality. I love that you touched on earlier that you acknowledged that you'd written in the book and then people saw these questions, said, okay, I need to go ask these specific questions. And your point isn't ask these specific questions, it's the mindset about being curious and having those conversations. And that's what hardwiring excellence is about. It's the number one, the psychology of the mindset of how to go about fomenting and driving excellence in an organization through tactics, but we've got to adapt them, right? We have to adjust and be curious and look at what's working and then do more of that.
Yeah, when I look at hardwiring, really what I was trying to get across is put in systems so there's consistency. Because the one thing that drives doctors crazy is inconsistency. The one thing that drives employees crazy,
flavor of the month,
is inconsistencies. One thing that drives middle managers crazy is inconsistency. You've heard that. Doctors would say to me, I want my patients on this unit. An employee will say, I'll go work as a nurse on that unit, but I'm not going on that unit. And really my whole goal was just to provide resources to create a more consistent experience for everyone.
Love it. Love it. Earlier you said, and I was planning on asking you this, but earlier in the show you said leadership is an inside job. Before you can get the outsides right, you have to get the insides right. What do you mean by that, Quinn?
Well, I go back to self-awareness again. And I asked Harry Gruner, who runs a pretty big venture capital firm, before you invest in a company, what do you look for? And he said self-awareness of the founder and coachability. And I've really taken that over the years as self-awareness. I entered into recovery when I finally could look at myself differently, not through rose-colored glasses, not being, I used to tell people I lived in two islands, the island of self-pity and the island of being a delusion. Anyway, so I think what I mean getting the inside right is there's great books out there on leadership. There's great coaches out there on leadership. Most every organization I know wants their leaders to do well. There is no C-suite CEO that wants their managers not to do well. There's resources. So, I look at an organization of 900 leaders and 800 of them are having a lot of success and 100 of them are struggling. And they've all gone through the same training, the same book, the same consulting. So what's getting in the way of those 100? Now, I don't know, but I can give you some thoughts that get in the way of people. Number one is blame. They fall into the trap of blaming somebody for their poor results. It's either the room I'm in or my corporate headquarters or my boss. That's why we always try to find success.
The staff, the patients.
Well, we try to find success in the same organization. Because if all of a sudden Quint says the problem is compensation and benefit, yet Patrick's got the same compensation and benefit plan for his employees and he's having success, it takes away that blame. So I think we have to look inside. Have we fallen in the trap of blaming somebody for the issues instead of looking really, what can we do? I think there's rationalization in healthcare. I call it sort of terminal uniqueness, but we're a little bit different here. You don't understand. We're Minnesota nice, or we're the South. We got into geography reasons why we're not, or it's usually, well, we don't have enough staff. Yet you find another person with the exact same staffing levels that are having success. So what I meant by that is you got to get rid of your blockages. And sometimes what's holding us back is us, but we don't know it. So once somebody can say, okay, what's getting in my way? Am I blaming? Am I feeling sorry for myself? Am I rationalizing? I think envy has a lot to do with issues of benchmarking. That if I say this, Patrick, is I go to an organization and the CEO will say, hey, look at this unit. Wow, they're doing really, really good. Let's everybody give them a nice round of applause. And I can tell the culture right then, because if everybody applauses, they've got a good culture. Now, the CEO has just asked you to be compliant with a very simple ask: clap. So when I look around and people aren't clapping, I'm wondering, do they not hear the CEO? Do they not know how to clap? Or they may be possibly a little envious of somebody getting recognized. And one of my things, I always would ask organizations to send me some of your success. I was in Detroit, and they sent me the fact that on the 9th floor, this patient care unit was just having great success in patient experience. So I just got up and thanked them. And I didn't know what type of floor. I just knew it was the 9th floor. And immediately 2 people ran up to me at break to say, I want you to know that's the OB unit. Now, why did they think I needed to know that?
I know that story. Yeah.
Oh, and it's this idea that birth.
Well, it's a happy place. There's new births. They're unique. They're unique, and that's why they're doing well.
Right. So that's what I mean. You've got to be willing to get your inside right. And once you get rid of the blockages, then all of a sudden you become more coachable, and then you're on your way to having a great success.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's leadership is the growth, and I want to transition to your book, and here's a copy of the book. I encourage folks to check this out. It is a delicious book, The Busy Leader's Handbook: How to Lead People and Places That Thrive. Sounds like a great episode title for our conversation here. How to lead people in places that thrive. Tell me about the latest book and what that means to you.
Well, I think the latest book I'm going to talk about in a little second, because that's coming out.
Yeah.
That's coming out in June. But what I did over the last couple of years is I look at, if my son or daughter came to me and said, hey, you've been in this healthcare, or you've been in leadership, just leadership for a long time. What are some best practices? So I went about and collected, I thought, 41 best practices. And I've always been a Peter Drucker fan. Right on my desk at home is the Peter Drucker daily book, where you open it up and every day you learn a little something. So I think I wrote that book because of my love for middle managers and recognizing their tough job they have. And I can go as a middle manager to a 2-day LDI, Leadership Development Institute. And it's nice. I hear great things, but I probably won't really learn it until I have to use it. So what that book is meant to do is, I do have to have a difficult conversation. Let me catch up on how to do that, or I do have to do this. So it's really 41 best practices that can be a desk reference guide. And it's really neat because the other 2 things happened recently. One, I spoke at Baylor University's MBA program, and they were supposed to all come up with a question for me. And one of the people wrote me and said, you know what, I had a bunch of questions, but then I read Busy Leader Handbook and they're all answered in there.
That's a great compliment.
Yesterday, I talked to neonatal specialist on burnout and stress. And when I got introduced, the physician said, hey, I've read Busy Leader Handbook and it's really been helpful to me. So that's it. But now in June, I'm very
Quinn, hang on. Before you get to the book, this Busy Leader's Handbook, what I love about this is there's 3 sections. The leader in you. There is, let me share with listeners here, optimizing employee performance. And the 3rd section is strategic foundational topics. There's an arc here. I have benefited from this book. There's a focus on you, and there's focus on you being a leader, and then there's strategy. And this is a great resource for folks to get a very practical manual that can be on your desk as a resource for you. It will come in handy if you get a copy of it. So I want to endorse that. But so what's coming down the pike?
Well, I'm very excited. I've been, I tease people, I've written a lot of books, but I'm like that musician where your first album was your greatest album, and you've been trying to, you're trying to duplicate it for the
It's like
last 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. More than a feeling. Anyway, so Hardwiring Excellence, as you know, is really, it's so gratifying. My other books since then, I think, have been, I wanted to write Hardwiring Excellence. I wanted to write it a passion, as a book with a passionate textbook is what I called it. It's got passion, but it's like a textbook of tools and techniques. I think my books since then have gone more tools and techniques because there are workshops I've done, there's things I've done. So they're very tactical oriented. So over the last year, with what's been going on, I've just been looking more and more into what is it that makes healthcare so special. And I believe there's some common things that make healthcare workers so special. Number one is they want to be helpful and useful. And while other people run away from danger and responsibility and accountability, healthcare people run to it. When I say healthcare, I'm including emergency medical personnel and all sorts of things.
All of us.
So the thought is, I think healthcare people have a calling in their DNA. I think healthcare's called them as much as they've called it. So when I've traveled the country, I'll say to people in healthcare, when did you first think about being in healthcare? And I'd hear stories like 5th grade, 8th grade, high school. Now they might know exactly. Most physicians knew they wanted to be in medicine in high school almost, or maybe college. They didn't know exactly until they went to medical school and rotated exactly what area, but they sort of had a calling. Then I talk about people that aren't clinicians. So if you look at the pandemic, we've got environmental services, we've got IT people, we've got security people, we've got food and beverage workers, we've got all these people that could do their job anywhere. One of my stories I love is the parking lot attendant who convinced a family they were in the right place because he just said, I've been praying for you. And they said that parking lot attendant changed everything for them. Now, if you come out of the mall and the parking lot attendant says, I've been praying for you, you're not going to have the same feeling. So I wrote this book called The Calling, Why Healthcare is Special. And I'm very excited about it because it really talks about our DNA. And so if people want to be helpful and useful, then our job is to create cultures that don't get in the way of them being helpful and useful. And so that's really what the book is about. And I'm very excited about it. I met John Maxwell about 2 years ago, and they asked John Maxwell, what's his favorite book? He said, the one I'm writing right now. And I said, for me, Hardwiring Excellence was always my favorite book. The other books are nice, but that was the one that was my favorite. And now I know what he means because the callings really resonated with me. So I'm sort of trying to create the 2021 version of Hardwiring Excellence.
Yeah. And I've seen you've shared an advanced version of it, and I've had the good fortune to be able to read through it. And I'm really excited about what you're doing with that book and where it's going, because it really speaks to, especially in the face of all the burnout and challenges we're facing in healthcare, this is a time to double down on why we do what we do and find meaning in the work we do, because there's so much burnout and sorrow that we're dealing with. And being able to connect with that meaning connects us to that calling, connects us to our soul. It connects us to our strength. It connects us to the joy of the work we do. So I'm excited about where that book is going. And for this episode, I want to ask you, there's been an amazing arc of your career, Quint. And I want to ask you, what's next for Quint Studer? The book comes out. Where are you going? What's next in the work you're doing?
Well, if you look at my career, normally I take it a day at a time. And
I kind of believe that, and I kind of don't.
Well, I think there's a couple things. Number one, I certainly am very, very excited about healthcare.
Yeah.
I think healthcare needs leaders and needs more than they ever have before, but they need a different type of leader.
Yeah.
They need a leader that's not lives and dies on metrics, but
Yeah.
understands relationship leadership.
And that speaks to strategy. That speaks to strategy about how you think about the now and the future.
I got asked a question yesterday, and they said, Quint, what's the number one skill set a leader needs today? And I said, how to show empathy.
True.
And I wouldn't have said that maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
True.
So I think that the other thing, Patrick, is you might know that I've been very involved in is brain development of young children. And
yes.
About 4 or 5 years ago, I got I didn't know what I didn't know, but I knew that we were having problems supposedly in 3rd grade reading, 4th grade math. And I started looking into it, and I got into looking at kindergarten readiness. And then I ended up at the University of Chicago with John List, who's in the economics department, and Dana Susskind, a physician who's at Comer Children's Hospital. And they were studying brain development from the medical term and the economic term. John List feels that the kindergarten readiness is the long-term economic health of a community. So we met with Dr. Susskind, and they were doing some neat work in communities. And I said, what if we got mom before she left the hospital? Because if 80 to 85% of the brain is developed by age 3, it seems like every day that goes by, we miss an opportunity. And she said, do you think you could get hospitals to do that? I said, well, I know I can get 3 hospitals in Pensacola, Florida to do it. So we became the pilot for the University of Chicago over the 3-year period, that every mom before she leaves the hospital gets a tutorial on how to build her baby's brain. And they then have followed it up, and now we have peer-reviewed research that shows that we are making progress. Then we partnered with Harvard on something called Basics. So every mom gets a text message twice a week, depending on the age of her child, on tips that they should be doing to build their baby's brain. We were the pilot for them too, so we now have peer-reviewed research on that. So somebody asked me the other day, if I had $1 billion, what would I do? I'd say I would make sure every mom that leaves a hospital has been given the gift of understanding how to build her baby's brain, because that's the difference maker. So I've got this thing called Build a Brain, Build a Life, Build a Community. And I'm really hoping now that we can take this everywhere, because we do have now a few other hospitals that are implementing it. We're even putting it into the electronic health record for pediatricians for well baby checks to have that brain conversation. What our peer research shows, Patrick, is women with a higher socioeconomic probably don't have as big a gain from what we're doing because they're already doing it. But children that are in a lower socioeconomic hear 30% less words, which are the deal that drives the brain. And our peer-reviewed research shows that we're doing quantum leaps with that group. So this probably wasn't what we were talking about, but
beautiful.
I think the reason I'm excited about being in healthcare, because if you know me, no matter what we're talking about, by the time I leave, we're going to have that early brain conversation. No matter why you let me come into your organization, we're going to talk early brain. And I was just in Dixon, Illinois, and once you explain it, the CEO goes, "Why, gosh, we've got to do this." And the labor and delivery manager says, "My nurses would love this," because when a mom leaves, she knows how to bathe her patient. She knows so many things to do with her baby, but we've never touched on how to build your baby's brain. It's like we only touch the shoulders down when they leave. And I think we have to move up the shoulders up also. So I'm very excited about the work we're doing and build a brain, build a life, and build a community.
That is outstanding. And I pray that just continues to grow and grow and grow, literally, as the brain's growing. But this has a global implication, and it's profound. And I pray that is very successful, Quint.
It's very inexpensive. That's the beauty. I try to create things that are scalable. And the way you scale things is make them affordable. Because remember, the staff is already there. So we've made it very, very inexpensive to an organization.
And you said earlier, if you had $1 billion, that's what you'd invest in. I want to ask you a similar kind of question. If you had the attention of all the healthcare folks around the planet, all of us, for a brief moment, what would you say to us, Quint?
Be kind to yourself. I think we're too hard on ourselves. I think healthcare people tend to look at what's wrong instead of what's right. I get that. We look at negative variances. We look at We usually talk to someone when we have something negative to say. Nobody calls facilities and engineering and says the temperature is good. So I think we really have to be kind to ourselves. I said, if I did a cartoon of a healthcare worker in a boxing ring, there'd be no other boxer with them, and they'd be wondering who's hitting them because they hit themselves.
Wow.
So I think kindness is really what I would tell people, is give them, just pause and love yourself a little bit. And I don't mean it in a self-centered way, but you do great work. You make huge differences. And sometimes I think healthcare workers just are too hard on themselves.
This show is about courage, compassion, joy, and hope. And what you just depicted with the notion of this boxer hitting themselves and the need for us to be compassionate with ourselves. I wish people could hear that. I wish people could hear your voice every day, hearing that message as a reminder, whether you're beginning your career, the middle of your career, nearing the end, the sunset of a career, to hear that message, to be compassionate, because you started with your kryptonite becoming your superpower in this arc of this episode, being compassionate with yourself. And here we're talking about helping our colleagues, whether you're developing tactics and tools for leadership, it all boils down to being compassionate with yourself and then having the mindset to be able to make that difference. I love it.
Well, thank you. I do a lot of work with AUPHA, who does programming for faculty and students in healthcare administration. I'm on the board of CAMI, which accredits as universities in healthcare administration.
Awesome.
So I'll be I think with George Washington University next week. And one of the things the students always ask me, if you could give me one piece of advice in healthcare, what would it be? And I say, be kind to yourself.
Yeah. You just heard it right from the mouth of Quint Studer. I love it. Quint, if folks are interested, I want to encourage folks. Where can they go? Where can they get copies of your book? Where can they learn about this brain development program? Where can they learn more about what the Studer Family Foundation is doing?
Well, I like getting to direct people. People write me and they're surprised because I respond. It's Quint, Quint, at Quint, QUINTSTUDER.com. It's my email. My phone number is 850-232-4648. So they can text me, they can email me, and I will respond and try to be as good a primary care person as I can possibly be.
I love it. I love it. Folks, bear in mind, Quint is on Eastern Standard Time, New York City time. So bear that in mind, depending on the hour that you text him. 1, 2, is there a website folks can go to learn more about the books, etc.?
Yeah, there's a couple websites. I get mixed up.
And I'll put them in the show notes. I'll put them in the show notes too.
Yeah, I think there's www.quintstuder.com. There's Studer. I think studeri.org is a real good one if they're looking at brain. Nice. It's studeri.org.
Nice. Well, I want to encourage folks to check that out. Man, Quint, I could stay here us talking for hours, getting to chat with you about all these topics, but I'm just so deeply grateful that you could be a guest on the podcast, and just want to thank you for your time and all the wisdom and the impact you've had in the past, what you're doing currently, and just the best wishes and all the efforts you're doing in the future, Quint.
All right. Well, I love you, Patrick Swift. I appreciate it.
Oh, love you, Quint. Thank you so much, brother. All right. Thank you, Quint.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, or leave a review about the show on your favorite platform, and learn how to support the podcast as a patron at swifthealthcare.com, where you can also find the show notes and all of our episodes. Thanks for joining us.